Hello, everybody. Back again. My name is Helen B. Hicks. I'm a licensed professional counselor, podcaster, author, parent coach, and mother of five. I am here with my co host.
My name is Curtis Brooks, and I am a men's life coach. I specialize in transformational leadership for men.
Awesome. So, thank you everyone for tuning in for another episode of the Jabez Experience for those who would like to live a blessed life. So, we hope that we are once again a blessing to you in your life, your situation, and all of those around you. Our topic for today is emotional intelligence. So, why don't you get us started, Curtis?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is going to be a powerful discussion. I'm excited about this discussion because I think emotional intelligence is a necessary for all of us, men, women, and if you can get your children there, that's great too. But for us adults, it's absolutely important for us to take up this space and learn more about it. So, with emotional intelligence, the foundation of emotional intelligence is self-awareness. And I think one of our episodes was had something to do with self-reflection of some sort, and that is really the basis of somewhat of the basis of the emotional intelligence that we're talking about. So self-awareness is going to be the foundation of emotional intelligence, but before you can even get to the self-awareness, it starts with self-reflection. So that's why the self-reflection is important, because if you can get to the self-reflection piece of it, you can really, that really kind of spills over into the self-awareness. And then now you can find yourself being mindful of your emotions, mindful of how you feel, mindful of those trigger points, because rest assured, in life, someone is going to touch those trigger points. And unfortunately in life, we cannot pull to the side of the road and though we might feel like it, pull to the side of the road and try to get ourselves together. Life is still happening for all of us, and that's a fortunate but unfortunate thing. Again, that we can't pull to the side of the road and say, "Let me fix my flat tire" or whatever the case might be. But the reality of it is that when we are self-aware of what's happening, we we're mindful of those emotions that come with those uh, feelings, if you will. Words are spoken. Words are oftentimes evoke feelings, and so but when we are mindful of things that are being said throughout the course of the day, they evoke certain feelings. And so I think with this emotional intelligence, that you have to be tempered, if you will. And we're going to speak about four of the components that's related to this emotional intelligence. But Helen, I want to hear from you. What you got?
All right. I mean, you got me very interested. I want to hear more about your side of it. So, when it comes to emotional intelligence, like one of the first starting points that I hit on with clients is that people tend to first try to connect to the situation.
Hmm.
And then, if they understand the situation, then they try to connect with the emotion. This is backwards. So, the first thing is, let's not even put a whole lot of emphasis on the situation, because when
Hmm.
people focus on the situation first, a lot of times what happens is, oh, well, I've never experienced that. So I don't know, how you're feeling and what you may need right now. Or it's a sense of, oh, well, I've been there and it wasn't that bad for me. So what are you crying
Hmm.
about?
Right,
there's
right.
like, there's an automatic judgment that is
Hmm.
associated when people try to kind of like tune into the situation. So I try to encourage people, let's put the situation to the side. That's really secondary. The
Hmm.
first thing you need to tune into is, how is this person feeling? Like, are they sad? Are they hurt? Are they disappointed?
Right.
Are they angry? Because we all know what it's like to experience those emotions. And when you tune in with the emotion that person is experiencing, and it's
Hmm.
not about judging their situation, then it becomes easier to relate to them and to understand where they're at, and to be open to hearing about, well, what led up to this, and if there is some responsibility you have in helping this person to get to the next step. So that's what I throw out there is, hey, connect on the emotional piece, because we've all experience the range of emotions.
Absolutely, Helen. I think it's important too, as far as when I'm working with my clients, I like to try and get the men that I'm working with to connect with their feelings, because and right off the bat they typically don't. But even before I get there, you said something that's very interesting, because how when people were responding to other people, oh, do this, it wasn't so bad. I did this and I didn't have such a difficult problem, or uh, at time doing such a thing. But it's also interesting because that when people speak from that space, they're obviously speaking from their own experience. And it's almost kind of like this thing that we hear people say, oh, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps and get, just go on with life. And I think that's interesting, that that's really the kind of space that a lot of people come from. But also recently, I just kind of in my own research and working with my clients, is that I found out that oftentimes when people don't include their emotions with the change that they're trying to take place, or that they're looking to take place in their life, uh, it never happens. Because until we include the emotions or the feelings with, we can find ourselves sitting in a stagnant place. But it's when we include the emotions, like you were saying moments ago, Helen, how do you feel? What's going on in your head, and blah blah blah, whatever the case might be. And so when we include the feelings those with those emotions, or with the words that are spoken, then change can be facilitated.
Okay. So I can say a lot about that, but
Please
you
do.
mentioned some
Please.
steps. You mentioned some steps, and I don't want to get caught up in a whole bunch
Okay,
of stuff
cool.
and then forget the steps. So tell us about the steps.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Sure. We got 4 steps. We got the first is self-regulation, and I like to call that step. I'll give you the other 3 steps in just a moment, but I want to hear your take on each of the steps as well. But so we have self-regulation. That is the first step, or at least that's the first component of that makes up this emotional intelligence that we were talking about. So that first step is self-regulation, and for me, I like that self-regulation. I like to use the word temperance, because the self-regulation is really about looking at where we've come from, and again, being mindful, being all again. When we're looking at self-regulation, we're not necessarily looking at self-regulation as a separate component away from the other things, because what's happening is that we're looking at the self-awareness, and we've got the self-regulation. Both of those things are going at the same time. And in actuality, all 4 of these components are happening at the same time. So there's no one thing that's isolated from the other. So it's just all happens simultaneously. So with this self-regulation, you again are really kind of a witness of us at a scene, if you will, and having to be mindful of your emotions, mindful of what your thoughts are, mindful of how you're feeling, mindful of your own situation that oftentimes creep up in certain scenes. If we don't like someone, or if we've seen a scene of an accident or something like that, we might tell the story. Each person might have something different to say about that story, but we want to make sure that our stuff doesn't show up as we are trying to get to a place of self-regulating. Does that make sense, Helen?
Yep, it does. And so I can add in there.
Yeah.
So when you say self-regulation, and I interpret that as self-soothing.
Hmm.
Um and I I'm sorry. Me saying self-soothing triggered me to think about something I did with someone else. But but basically, when you were an infant, when you were a child, like one of the very first things you did was self soothe. Whether that was latching on to a bottle, a pacifier, sucking fingers, sucking on blankets or whatever toys, things of that nature. That is an act of self soothing. And it is very much human nature to want to comfort and soothe yourself.
Right.
But as we get older, we start cutting kids off from that. Now, do not do not misunderstand me. I am not an advocate of seeing a 4-year-old with a pacifier in his mouth. I'm not.
No, you're not.
I'm not saying that at all, but as there are certain expectations, social expectations of children, and we start kind of cutting them off from certain self soothing techniques without introducing them to healthier or more age appropriate ones, over time, we as people start learning not to self soothe. We stop doing that. And then
Mm,
when you get to be an adult and you're this hot mess, and a therapist like me comes in and says, "Hey, you need to learn how to self soothe." You're like, "What?"
right, right.
And it becomes like this foreign concept, but that's truly how I'm interpreting self
Mm,
regulation,
mm,
because that's you being able to tune into you and say, "I'm not okay. I'm not in a place where I can have this conversation, I can have this interaction." And rather than lashing out at the other person and making them feel responsible for my emotional state,
right.
I need to take a moment, step back. I need to breathe. I need to sit down. And if you find comfort in drinking hot tea or coffee or anything that's appropriate,
Right, right.
then you do what works for you to just calm you down, to take care of you. Give yourself a literal or figurative hug, but just to take care of you before you attack someone
Mm,
else with the expectancy that after you attack them, they're going to take care of you.
mm. Interesting, interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, Helen. How much I think before we come to a place of understanding for each of us, I think a lot of us we we place that burden on other people to take care of us. When we're dealing with something, we can easily again place that burden on someone else to take care of us. I want to get to this other point as well, but you are actually spot on, Helen, in regards to what that self-regulation it is, self-soothing, something as what we would uh, require a child to do or show a child how to do. But as you stated, when we become adults, we throw all of that understanding or teaching out the window and think that we're going to be able to maintain our composure or our character or just keep things together. And and as an adult, from a child to an adult, we've dealt with a ton of different things from one stage of our lives to another. And so it can be very difficult to connect the dots again, as you stated. When you're working with a client, they're like, "What's this? What is that self-soothing?" And it's like, well, it's the same thing you were doing as a child, but now we call it self-regulating. So that second point, excuse me, that second point or component of this emotional intelligence is motivation. And you know what I thought about when I was doing my research on this? I thought about your acronym or your definition of motivation. Can you give that to us again, Helen?
Now you put me on the spot. I don't even remember
Well,
what I
okay,
said.
I do remember it was. I do remember it was. I'm sorry, I do because I wanted to use that part of it, but I can't remember the entire thing. But I do remember it was determined. It was desire, determination, and then motivation.
Right. Okay.
There you go.
So you
So,
said acronym, and I'm like, what acronym did
oh yeah,
I
I did say acronym. Yes, but I'm
use?
sorry, I apologize. But I did say acronym. So it was Helen in one of our episodes. I can't remember which one it was, but she gave a really just some great information in regards to just what motivation actually is, rather than people. She was saying that people just don't become motivated. First, there's the desire, and then there's determination, and then there's some motivation. So the second component for emotional intelligence is motivation. And so it is the internal drive or the persistence that we will give towards working towards a goal. And so it's interesting because I think that the more we are concerned with our own selves, dealing with our own shortcomings and trying to make those adjustments and changes as necessary, and to essentially get out of our own way. I think that at some point, the motivation, the drive that once was there, uh, it begins to make it make its way back to something that we could say, whoa, wait a minute, this is where I used to be. So now, as I'm clearing the path and getting to a place of, again, building myself up in character and in integrity, again, being the self-awareness, the self-regulation, the self-soothing, as Helen mentioned. Now I can make my way back to motivation, or I can see the motivation or the desire and the determination, and now the motivation, those things creeping up, and me wanting to be a part of that and make those changes in my life. So the motivation is going to be the second component of this emotional intelligence as we're trying to uh, self-soothe, self-regulate, self-awareness, and we come up with the second component that is going to be the motivation.
Awesome. So again, what I'm hearing is that's coming back up into that the emotions connected with change that you talked about before, that I kind of skipped over because I wanted to hear the steps. But
Mhm.
like motivation to me really kind of comes back in and pulls that emotional component or connection to change back into play, because how you feel about either the desired change or
Mhm.
the required change, because there's definitely a difference.
Sure,
We all
absolutely.
feel that difference when you change because you want to versus you change because there's no other choice.
Right, right, right.
And there's an emotional component that is always there, and I'm always very mindful of the basis, the I guess the foundational emotional piece of change is always going to be discomfort,
Mm,
because it is disrupting the current pattern. And
absolutely.
when we disrupt our current patterns, our brains perceive that as painful. you
Mm,
know our brains get very used to the same thing over and over and over and over
mm,
again, and that is easy for our brains just to stay where it's nice and
absolutely.
smooth, and don't disrupt the flow and keep everything status
Mm,
quo. um, so when you introduce change, there's always going to be an element of discomfort, and perhaps even a sense of painfulness in having to make that change. But that is going to be a part of change no matter what the change may be. So I
absolutely.
always I always try to get people to understand that, because if you understand it, then you don't kind of repel
Mm,
when you start to feel that discomfort. And then, because people tend to think it's a sign, I shouldn't do this. This isn't comfortable. It's supposed to be good for me, but it doesn't feel good right now. So, should I really be doing this in the moment? And I'm like,
mm,
yes.
right.
And again, the discomfort is just from the fact that you're getting out of that comfort zone. You're stepping away from what's familiar and you're going into the unknown. And that is painful, that is uncomfortable, that is scary. So you can have a lot of emotions that come up whenever you're facing change, even the ones that you want to make happen. So if you understand that, accept that's going to be a part of your experience, then you can deal with the other emotions that are there that are in regards to this change. Because, like I said, change can be desired and it can be required.
Absolutely, absolutely, Helen. Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. I love that desired or required piece there because I think that kind of what you were saying a little while ago, or one of the previous episodes, is that when you're on this journey, being cognizant and saying, "Hey, you know what? I want to become a better me, a better version of myself," and when you are, when you've got that on the table, if you will, so to speak. Uh, it is nice to be able to at times reward yourself. I'm taking a break because it is work. It is work. Change is not easy. So It's nice to be able to reward yourself with a day off, and that day off doesn't mean that you just let your mind go haywire, but just a day to relax, be it at the beach, or just having a special snack or a special treat or something like that, or just a day at the movies or a spa day, or something that you're going to entreat yourself to make this journey less arduous, because it is going to be that. It's going to be a challenge, but it is important to make sure that we are rewarding ourselves. As Helen said, conversely, uh, if the change is required, because if it's required, it can absolutely feel like it's being forced upon you. And as people, I don't think most of us don't like to be when something's forced upon us, or we're told that we should change because of X, Y, Z. So the third point is empathy. Empathy is understanding and being sensitive to the emotions of others, allowing for deeper connections and improved communication. Empathy is absolutely powerful, and I think that as we are working towards this uh, place of emotional intelligence, we also have to remember the compassion. Compassion begins to show up as well, because I think at some point uh, we don't play the blame game anymore. We begin to come into a place of accepting that, hey, this is my stuff. I did this, or this was the life that was presented to me, and I'm deciding to make those changes. I'm deciding to uh, build bridges that were destroyed in the midst of just doing life and building relationships and making friends, and people decide decisions that people had made, and sometimes those decisions included us, and other times those decisions did not include us. So it is important that as we are taking this journey to emotional intelligence, or building this space up in our hearts and our mind, that we are building empathy. Empathy is showing up. And so it's very interesting, because it's not something, these things are not necessarily something you just say, well, I'm going to work on empathy. It's very interesting, because as we start to peel back the layers, and this is very powerful, as we start to peel back the layers, you'll see the empathy, the heart, your own heart beginning to change, and you'll see the compassion coming forth. You might even see yourself almost to a place where you're being more sensitive to the needs of others, because now there are layers being peeled back of what perhaps what you have dealt with, the individual may have dealt with in their own life. You might even find yourself crying at different times, because there's the residual, the residue from just the hardness of our hearts throughout the course of just doing life. So those things will show up, and empathy is part of it, and absolutely add compassion in there as well.
Great. So I'm going to add another piece of that.
Okay, good deal.
Because in my experience,
Mhm.
understanding has to precede both of those. Like,
Yeah,
it's
well said.
hard for you to empathize and to have a sense of compassion for someone unless you understand.
Yeah, well
And
said.
understanding requires some type of dialogue. You can't sit back and assume that you know all the aspects of someone else's situation, their
Mhm.
life conditions, like whatever it is that they've experienced, if you don't have some sort of dialogue. um
Right,
and I always use like this little example, like, it's really easy to hear a statement of, hey, that man just robbed that store. And then you can have that, reaction of, oh, that's so terrible. Why would somebody do that? Why would he, endanger other people and this, that, and the other? And you can come up with all these judgments against that person.
right,
But then if you hear the story and you say, look, he's a single father. He got laid off from his job 3 months ago. He's been struggling to make ends meet. He's applied to over 100 jobs, no interviews, no, like, he is just
right.
trying to put food on the table for his kids that he's responsible for. And then now that you have information, you can open up your own understanding. And then that leads to that empathy and that compassion where you say, oh my God,
Absolutely.
that poor man, what can I do to help?
Mm.
Because without that understanding, in the absence of understanding, I should say, we assume. And when we assume, it is often not to anyone's benefit. We will assume the worst, whether it's for ourselves or it's for others. We are slow to give people, and again, even ourselves, the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, absolutely, Helen. And it's interesting to me how many players throughout the course of life, especially with the news media, they will play into this, and because I think they know just the science behind people, the psychology behind people, is that oftentimes people, we have a tendency to lump everything in one box, so to speak. And it does not mean that we need emotions for that situation. We just need to hear the information, and the information strikes up the emotions. And just as you said, the understanding is absolutely going to be very, very important. Much to what you've stated already, is that it is going to come before the empathy. It's going to come before the compassion, but it is the self awareness is first. You dive into the self awareness, you get into the eventually the understanding, or the self reflection, self awareness, then the understanding. All of these things are huge components that make up the whole being, if you will, or at least as discussing the emotional intelligence piece of it. Uh,
Absolutely. You just kind of triggered, because when we talked about self regulation, I went into self soothing, and I
mhm,
didn't really address the other piece of that, which is the self awareness.
mhm,
So, again, that comes back to, like you said, when we talked, I think our very first episode in regards to self reflection,
mhm,
and just giving yourself the time and the space to acknowledge where you're at, why
right,
you're there, what led up to you experiencing what you're experiencing. And another thing that I share with clients is, it's really, really important for you to label your feelings, give them names. And I don't care if the name you give it is blah, as long as you can recognize blah when it comes
right,
again, and you know what you need to do for you when blah hits you.
mm,
I don't care. But the labels are important because they help to guide you. And that's that piece of self awareness. That's how you start to distinguish between, okay, when I'm feeling this way, this is what I need, versus when I'm feeling this over here, that doesn't really cut it. I need something else.
mm,
So that's a huge piece of self awareness, is just being able to label your own experience. And
right,
nobody else has to have the same labels as you. But if
right,
you're in a relationship that is important to you, then it becomes necessary to have those conversations and to share that sense of,
mm,
okay, well, when I say this, this is what I mean, or this is what it means to me, so that your partner can be on the same page with you. Or if it's not a partner, your friend can still understand, oh, okay, so this is how I can be a support to you.
right. Absolutely. Yeah, that self awareness piece is. Uh, I mean, we're speaking of terms and terminology and definitions and things of that nature, but the process in itself is it's a lot of work. It is definitely a place where you have to really admit, say, hey, you know what? I feel this way. I don't like her. I don't like him. Why are they doing that? And there's all these different conversations or thoughts that show up in our minds. We have to be willing to address those things. And it's not just it's not just saying I don't like her, I don't like him, and why is he doing that? Look at them. Why doesn't he just do this? Why don't you do this? Whatever, all these different things that show up. But we have to be able to address not only the feelings, but say, well, why is it that you don't like her? All of this self-aware, so we have to be willing to address those things. And it's not just leave a blanket statement out there and say, oh, I don't like her. And that's just almost as if someone gives you a story, kind of what Helen was sharing with us earlier, where there was a story and you don't have all the details. This man who's angry about a situation, but you don't have all the details. And so for us to make a blanket statement about, oh, I don't like him, I don't like her, it's the same thing. Whereas that you need more information. Why don't you like him? Why don't you like her? So what's triggering you? So again, this is all part of that self-awareness that we must really kind of dive into in order to loose the emotions that's with those things, in order to just kind of uh, uncan those emotions that are trapped up behind those words. Because if they're just words, it ends up being that we can find ourselves easily manipulated or being angry for no apparent reason. So
Okay. I'm sorry, was there more?
yeah, no, go ahead. I'll go to the next point after
Oh,
that.
so I just want to jump in regards to like emotions. Because you said people having that reaction, ooh, I don't like her. Um, so I go to our emotions are they're just basically like signals. They're
Mm,
basically saying, "Hey, yoo-hoo, I don't really like what's happening over here."
mhm,
And their job is to bring a certain level of awareness to you,
absolutely.
and they're trying to convey a message, but
Mm,
unfortunately, emotions don't show up, like a sticky note and say,
right, right.
okay, this is why I'm
On
here
your
and this is what
forehead.
you need to do, right? That's not how they show up. So you
Right,
just
right.
experience them, and it becomes your job to figure out, well, why
Mm,
am I feeling this way? Just like you said, well, why don't you like her? Because it's
right.
triggering something within you. And in essence, it may not be the her at all.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So those emotions show up just to make you aware that something is transpiring
Mm,
within you. Like that's your emotional reaction. That's not somebody else's reaction. That's yours.
mm,
So it's about you. And it's about you figuring out you, not trying to identify all the different ways you don't like her.
right. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. That's very interesting that you said that, Helen, because it makes me think about this show I used to watch. I haven't seen it in a while now, but it was called My 600 Pound Life, and and the different counselors or therapists that would talking with the different people on the show, they would talk about their eating habits and things of that nature. But then uh, one of the therapists or the doctor, just I can't remember saying he's somewhere here in Texas, but he would say at some point the person, much like you were saying that with with the words come the emotions, and we oftentimes will push those emotions or not respond to the emotions, then we're just left with the words themselves, which in fact, in turn, at some point, the words become a trigger. Now it brings up certain emotions that we're now trying to push down, much like how this doctor would explain what the people who would be overeating, that their body gives them a sign, say, hey, you are full, your stomach is full, you've eaten too much. And now through their own situations, that their respective situations that they've gone through, the trauma or different things they've gone through, they will bypass those feelings or the mind telling them that they're full. And it's the same way with the words that we say when a person says, I don't like him or I don't like her. There are words that are being used that we're thinking about or someone has said to us, and those words invoke feelings. And when they invoke the feelings, we don't respond to the feeling that's Helen just mentioned. And then we can find ourselves being triggered by certain things that are now evoking those feelings. But over a period of time, and when we have not dealt with those feelings, they become very dangerous. I want you to respond on that. I know you got something for me.
So no, I really like that. Um,
Yeah.
because I can see that developing in
Mhm.
so many different ways. Whether it's people reacting to their emotional traumas,
Right.
because emotional traumas are attached to words.
Yeah.
It's attached to the things that people have said to you in whatever circumstances. And a lot of times it's not even necessarily about what's happening in your current environment. It's just the fact that somebody said those words that remind you of the other person who used those words against you.
Mm.
And you're reacting out of that. And because you've suppressed those emotions, you're not even connecting to the fact that, oh, this really isn't about the words.
Right.
It's about everything that happened around those words being said by this person over
Absolutely.
here. And so
Absolutely.
it becomes very easy for people to displace those emotions and then to attack someone else because now this other person has said those words and, don't you say that to me. The person's like, wait, hold on.
Right.
So I think, again, that's a huge piece of self-awareness,
Hmm.
um, and self-regulation, of being able to know, oh, that's my issue. That's
Right.
something I need to work on, instead of throwing that out at somebody else and saying, well, now this is your problem because you
Yes.
said something that they had no idea was even an issue. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Person is literally unsuspecting of the storm that they're about to walk into. But so our last piece, guys, if you missed this episode, something's wrong with you. This is a great episode, guys. Just want to let you know. So you need to watch this episode here. Some powerful nuggets are being shared here. So we got the last one being social skills. This is the fourth component of our emotional intelligence. So if you are in the area hanging out, wanting to develop your emotional intelligence skills, or at least begin this journey, thus far we've talked about the emotional intelligence, the foundation of emotional intelligence being self-awareness. And that self-awareness is being mindful. We've got the self-regulation. We got the self-soothing, as Helen calls it as well. Motivation, and we talked about the two different components to motivation. That's going to be desire, and that's going to be determination. And then we get to motivation, and we got the empathy. We also mentioned that with the empathy piece of it, there is going to be the understanding that comes well before the empathy. So somewhere in the first parts of this journey, as you're working towards your emotional intelligence, it's going to be the, again, we mentioned the self-awareness. It's going to be the understanding. That's all still going to fall in that piece as well, that part as well. And I think I mentioned compassion. So is these things, before you can get to the empathy, you have to definitely take a walk through understanding it. Absolutely. So this last component, we've got social skills. That is ability to manage relationships effectively using emotional understanding to navigate social complexities and resolve conflicts. This is huge, and there all these pieces are components of emotional intelligence are absolutely huge. But uh, no, there's no relationship like a relationship when you are factoring in the other person, and when you're being mindful of the other person, be it your spouse or a friend or your children, it doesn't matter. We have parents who are dealing with trauma situations as they are raising their children, and just a plethora of different things people are dealing with all over the world. But and as it relates to building this emotional intelligence, the social skills are going to be hugely important. You're going to need to be mindful of how you are how you are carrying yourself, your disposition, because let's face it, uh, our thought life says a whole lot about us. Our thought life will literally put a frown on our face, and we don't even realize that we're frowning about something, because internally there are these thoughts. So we want to be cognizant of how we are relating to other people, uh, and building those relationships. And we want to be mindful of how we're using our language, our words, because our words, in fact, could be triggering another person, and in turn, there's this snowball effect. They're triggering us now. So, Helen, what you got for us?
so I think social skills, it's very complex. I mean, and I think I have to start with, a lot of people assume social skills are common sense,
Hmm.
but they're not, because social skills are also derived from our individual cultural experiences. And I don't mean that cultural just in the sense of ethnicity, but you have a culture to different socioeconomic statuses. You
Mhm.
know, there's an expectation of how you are going to interact with people at different stages of life, you
Hmm.
know. So
Interesting.
social skills becomes very complex, and I immediately think of a work environment, because a work environment is where you can have people of all sorts of
Right.
backgrounds come and mesh together, and you don't necessarily know what their background is. You don't know what their cultural history
Yeah.
is and what they're used to and what would be considered, normal, from wherever they come
Right.
from. Um, and then we put these expectancies out here in regards to social skills, assuming that, well, everybody knows that.
Absolutely.
Not necessarily. So
Mm.
I think there's a piece of social skills that comes back to understanding. Like, this is not just about like work environments where there may be very little interpersonal reactions
Mm.
or interactions, but also within your intimate, relationships, you
Mhm.
know, having those discussions. Well, hey, what does it mean to you when I say this, when I do that? When you're here, do you want me to? Do you not want me to? Like, a
Right.
lot of people take those types of interactions for granted, and then they have those emotional reactions when someone isn't reacting the way
Right.
they think is appropriate.
Mm.
Again, those social skills that, like, oh, well, when I say this or when I look like that, you should know. Like,
Right. Yeah.
and I've definitely encountered that, with a lot of women. Like, I am not beating up women in any way, shape, or form. If I'm stepping on your toes, I apologize. I hope they don't hurt too bad, but then you also realize there's some changes that need to be made.
Right.
Um, because I've encountered so many women who, they make certain statements, again, those words that we've talked about, and
Mhm.
those words have relevance and meaning to them,
Right.
but they have not adequately shared with other people what those words mean to them. And then they react because they're not getting what they want from people
Mm.
when they say those words. And then their reaction is, well, you should know. Based on what? What conversation was
Mm.
had? When did you disclose? Well, here's my truth. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I experienced. Here's what I
Yeah.
need. When was that conversation had?
Right.
So I agree 100% that social skills is indeed a part of emotional intelligence, but please do not take it for granted that it is common sense and that whatever you've experienced, other people have experienced, and that you guys are automatically on the same page. No, this is still a conversation that needs to be had. And if there's friction that takes place, that should be your number one sign that there's a conversation that should be had.
Mm. Absolutely. 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 Yeah. It's interesting, Helen, because as it relates to the social skills here, I think for each of us, for me, even when I was younger, I was a person who was more, who would ideally or typically sit back and observe. And I think part of this, as I've grown up, become a mature adult, I think part of this emotional intelligence is sitting back, observing. And again, not just obviously not just with the self reflection or being self aware, but observing people before we open our mouth and listening, our active listening skills. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're engaged in a conversation, but we're listening to find out how we can serve. I'll put it that way. And I think it's important for us to do that. And I know it seems like there's a lot of different components to this, and it's a lot. It sounds like a lot because there is several different components, but it's very interesting because a lot of these different components, as you're peeling back the layers on one, you can find yourself moving or being upgraded, if you will, to the next component, the next the next opportunity, if you will, for you to again to remove those layers would be judgment, because judgment in itself is going to cloud our vision, and just with a host of so many other things that we as people sometimes that deal with character flaws, jealousy, disdain for another person, all these different things, they will cloud our vision, and and unfortunately prohibit us from entering into this space of the different layers that we've discussed with you already.
Right. So, yeah, I'm right there with you in terms of like making those judgments. Um, I think that's how a lot of people get hurt. That someone has observed something, but they didn't have a conversation. They didn't clarify. They didn't say,
Yeah.
hey, well, what do you mean when
Hmm.
you did this? And, what does that mean to you? What is
Right.
it you hope to gain from that? They didn't have any conversations. They observed something. They made a judgment about what that observation means to them, and then they
Right.
assumed that the other person had the same intention.
Hmm.
And
Right.
then they reacted off of their assumptions. So
Hmm.
I mean, I think the whole topic of emotional intelligence is huge, and I know I've seen it in a lot of different places, recently, but I don't think a lot of people really understand how
Right.
intricate it is. Like, it's not
Absolutely.
just as much as, oh well, you told me how you felt and I got it. That's good.
Right. 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 Right.
It goes so much deeper than that, and there's so many different intertwining pieces of it. That emotional intelligence, I would say, is about, one, you having the awareness that all these different pieces are there, and then you
Absolutely.
having enough concern and consideration to explore them,
Hmm.
so that way you can, have a level of understanding that leads to the empathy and the compassion for others. And that, it just feeds into everything else that we're talking about, because you have to have this self-awareness and the self-regulation to even understand that there's a need for it.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And Helen, I mean, just as you stated that so nicely, it's not to mention that as you're working towards those things, you can you can easily find yourself in a battle, so to speak, uh, internal battle, because you're now working towards uh, being authentic. You're working towards integrity. You're working towards a fullness, a wholeness, if you will. And much of life has kept us, so many of us, dispersed in all areas or just being distracted. And so if you find yourself again on this journey, uh, it's definitely not easy, but it's absolutely well worth it, because now you're having the wherewithal, as Helen just nicely stated, is that you've got all these different pieces that it's definitely not as easy as people sound. And there's so many people. I completely agree with you, Helen. So many people are just, oh, I understand what you're saying. Oh, I get this. I get that. And they're just really kind of tossing words out there because they're the they're what's trending or some of some sort. But in order
Right.
to really understand this emotional intelligence, you've got to be here with this process. And part of this process is recognizing who you are, where you are, how you feel, and claiming that hey, that's mine. Oops, I dropped that. That's mine. Excuse me. Let me pick that up, kind of thing. And it's important for us to get to that place, because as long as we don't, or at least when the feelings come up and we find ourselves ignoring those feelings, as Helen stated earlier, uh, we can find ourselves just in a mess, in a huge mess, where it becomes very difficult for people to even have a conversation with us about, just personal landmines everywhere, so
Just blowing people up.
right,
but
just blow people up.
but no, I mean, I
Oh,
like that last point that you threw in there. I mean, I know a lot of this, the self-regulation, the motivation, the empathy, and the social skills, it's starting with that sense of self.
Hmm.
and then we really were kind of talking a lot about how we can see the benefits in others when we
Sure.
have developed these pieces within ourselves. But I like how you threw in there the benefits to your own self for doing this. It's not just about doing this for other people. This is
Yes.
about doing it for yourself. And,
Absolutely.
just like I said, the situation is
Mm.
secondary. Like, the other people are secondary. It's an
Yeah.
added benefit, but
Mm.
you definitely get a ton of benefits for yourself by
Yes, you.
being able to capitalize on emotional intelligence.
Absolutely. Can you, and I know as we're wrapping it up here, Helen, can you imagine per people or a person, individuals being tugged on and pulled on in every direction? And so with this emotional intelligence, it allows us as an individual, people or a person, whoever, it allows you to just kind of wrangle those things in, those loose ends, so to speak, so that you can find yourself again, as I like to use the word, tempered and or forged into the very thing that you're working towards. And you don't have those loose ends where you're pulled and tugged in, and this person said this and you're triggered on this, now you're distracted on this and you're distracted on that. When you're working towards this emotional intelligence, it's more about you than them. So that's all I got.
Right. And I'll just add one more thing and we will absolutely wrap it up. I'm also seeing emotional intelligence as part of the pathway to you no longer being a victim. Just like
Absolutely.
Curtis, you're
Right.
talking about other people tugging on you and pulling you in this direction and pulling you in
Mhm.
that direction. That's how people feel when they're in that victim space. They
Yeah.
feel like they have no control, they have no sense of empowerment, that they're just going in whatever direction the wind is blowing. Like,
Mhm.
this becomes your sense of empowerment where you get to
Yes.
own your experience. You get to own how you show up. You get to own the direction that you move in. So, like, if
Mm.
you are an individual who has been struggling with that sense of feeling victimized in life,
Mm.
this is your pathway to self empowerment and whatever kind of life you truly want to create for yourself.
Absolutely. That's the ticket right there, Helen. Front row seats, baby. That's the
And
ticket.
on
That's good stuff. Good stuff, Helen.
Yes, good stuff from you. I appreciate you having these 4 steps and just really bringing everything together.
Good deal. Well, I'm learning from you, Helen. So
We're learning from each other. I appreciate that.
absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So, goodbye, everyone, and we will see you next time.
All right. Ciao. See you later.